Welcome to our channel. In this video, we journey through the life of one of Hollywood's most compelling young stars, Sal Mineo. From his early struggles and remarkable rise to fame in classics like Rebel Without a Cause and Exodus, to the personal battles and societal pressures that ultimately overshadowed his success, we uncover the story of a talent gone too soon. Join us as we explore his turbulent childhood, groundbreaking career, and the tragic end that shocked the entertainment world. Childhood Salvatore Mineo Jr. emerged from the lively urban tapestry of the Bronx. Both areas shared important social and cultural similarities during the mid-20th century. They were home to diverse immigrant communities, Italian, Irish, African American, Jewish, living side by side in working-class neighborhoods. The mention of wayward activities suggests that Sal, like many young boys in these urban environments, occasionally found trouble around street corners. Small acts of delinquency were common coping mechanisms for youth seeking identity in crowded cityscapes where opportunities could be limited. His mother, Josephine, emerges in the text as a central figure, alarmed by her son's antics but also ready to intervene. That early life was not simply about adolescent restlessness, it foreshadowed Sal's innate charisma and impulsive energies. Parental concern and urban pressures merged to shape the environment where Sal's potential could either bloom or dissipate. Had Josephine decided differently, Sal's life might never have diverged from the typical path of a neighborhood kid getting by on odd jobs. Even from this young age, there were hints of nonconformity, a trait that would become more pronounced as Sal navigated Hollywood. Homosexuality was largely criminalized and pathologized in mainstream America. The text notes that homosexuality was taboo, establishing the systemic prejudice and fear that Sal would confront. As a child, of course, these issues were just beneath the surface, but understanding the broader social climate is crucial to contextualizing the challenges Sal would face. Even if he was not fully aware of his orientation at an early age, the neighborhood's attitudes and wayward experiences might have played a formative role in shaping how he perceived himself, feeling different from peers in more ways than one. Family talent scouts were an integral part of the entertainment industry's ecosystem back then. Studios and theaters often sent out representatives to scour local theaters, pageants, and even street corners in major cities like New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles in search of the next breakout star. These scouts had an eye for spotting intangible qualities, perhaps an it factor that signaled a child could withstand rigorous training and captivate a crowd. One fateful day, such a scout noticed Sal, perhaps performing some impromptu dance moves or belting out a tune. This chance encounter set the trajectory for the rest of his life. The real hero here, though, is Josephine. Picture a working-class mother with limited means, daily stress, and a boisterous son who was constantly getting into mischief. Under these circumstances, it's easy to see how many parents would dismiss the idea of enrolling their kid in acting or dance classes. Yet Josephine sensed that performance was not just a frivolous pastime but possibly the key to keeping her son engaged and out of trouble. It took remarkable courage on her part to pursue the scout's suggestion, especially when there was no guarantee of success. At a time when most boys were expected to become breadwinners in more traditional professions, construction, manufacturing, trade work, Josephine's choice was unconventional and even risky. We also need to consider the cost. Acting lessons, voice coaches, dance instructors, these were luxuries for people in Sal's socioeconomic bracket. Many families in their neighborhood struggled to pay rent or put food on the table, let alone bankroll an artistic dream. Josephine's decision implies an enormous faith in Sal's abilities and the hope that a future in show business might pay off, not just financially but also morally, by guiding him away from unsavory influences. She likely had the intuitive sense that if Sal didn't channel his energy creatively, the streets would teach him different, possibly destructive, lessons. Moreover, the tradition of parents guiding their children into performance was well established in certain communities. For instance, vaudeville-era families often traveled from theater to theater. Though by the 1950s, vaudeville was on the decline, the ethos of grooming a child for the stage or screen still existed. Josephine's unwavering support foreshadows the dynamic we see in countless stories where a single parental figure or guardian invests everything to see a child flourish in a craft. Some might find parallels here with the mothers of Frank Sinatra or Tony Bennett, who championed their sons' musical talents. Sal's situation was unique in that his mother was not just supportive but actively strategic, believing wholeheartedly that the arts were his salvation. Thanks to Josephine, Sal never disappeared into the sea of anonymous city kids. By pursuing professional training, he entered a domain where discipline, artistic skill, and emotional expression were paramount. This redirection was critical not only to Sal's personal growth but also to the evolution of teen stardom. Sal's brand of youthful intensity contributed to changing how teenagers were portrayed on stage and screen. If Josephine had not followed that scout's advice, we might never have witnessed the unforgettable moments Sal Mineo offered to Hollywood. Career Sal's enrollment in the Professional Children's School in Manhattan was a major game-changer. This institution, still operational today, has served countless young performers, including stars like Christopher Walken and Scarlett Johansson in later generations. Flexible schedules allowed Sal to attend auditions, rehearsals, and even matinee performances without neglecting his education. This environment placed him among peers who shared similar dreams, and it likely ignited a friendly sense of competition that spurred him to refine his craft. Acting in a Tennessee Williams play, The Rose Tattoo, even in a minor role, meant Sal was honing his ability to handle complex emotional scripts. By 1951, when he landed a part in The King and I, Sal stood side by side with Yul Brynner, a revered figure in musical theater, absorbing professional techniques that would pay off in Hollywood. During these years, American entertainment was perched between the old studio system, where actors were often under long-term contracts that dictated most aspects of their careers, and an emerging independent scene that prized raw talent and new storytelling methods. Sal straddled this line effectively. He had the dance and vocal training reminiscent of an earlier era's triple threat stars but also brought a new emotional depth that the 1950s teen audience craved. Then came 1955 and Rebel Without a Cause, which catapulted not only Sal but also James Dean and Natalie Wood to a special kind of stardom. That film wasn't just a typical teenage drama, it was a cultural moment. Director Nicholas Ray captured adolescent angst and dysfunctional family life with a realism that jolted American audiences. Sal's portrayal of Plato, with underlying feelings of idolization and love for Dean's Jim Stark, was groundbreaking for its subtlety. Even if mainstream critics were not ready to discuss the homoerotic subtext, plenty of viewers picked up on the nuance. This set Sal apart from other young actors who stuck to safe, conventional portrayals of boy meets girl. After Rebel Without a Cause, Sal became a hot commodity. He took on a spate of roles that demonstrated considerable range, from the gritty realism of Somebody Up There Likes Me, where he shared the screen with Paul Newman, to the sprawling epic Giant, which featured Elizabeth Taylor, Rock Hudson, and James Dean in his final completed film role. Sal's knack for authenticity in roles across different genres kept audiences guessing. When many teen stars of the 1950s were locked into a single archetype, the squeaky clean crooner, the rebellious biker, the all-American football hero, Sal avoided such pigeonholes. Plus, his music career gave him an additional platform to reach fans. At the height of rock and roll's early explosion, Sal's pop singles, though not on par with Elvis or Ricky Nelson, still showcased a versatile talent unafraid to dabble in multiple facets of show business. But the real apex of Sal's Hollywood career arguably came with Exodus, 1960, directed by Otto Preminger. Portraying a young Holocaust survivor, Dov Landau, Sal dove into a role brimming with emotional weight. This wasn't a light-hearted teen romance, it was a monumental story about the founding of Israel and the aftermath of unimaginable trauma. His performance earned him another Academy Award nomination and a Golden Globe win, achievements that should have cemented him among the top-tier stars of the era. Yet, the winds of Hollywood change were blowing in the 1960s. A new generation, embodied by actors like Dustin Hoffman, Jane Fonda, and later Al Pacino, would approach acting with method intensity and align with more overtly political, countercultural narratives. Sal, whose stardom was partially tethered to his teen idol image, struggled to find a comfortable seat at Hollywood's evolving table. As the 1960s gave way to the 1970s, Sal found himself caught between typecasting and an industry that was rapidly redefining itself. He tried to pivot back to theater, taking risks on directorial work, especially with productions that confronted taboo themes. Fortune in Men's Eyes, with its raw depiction of sexuality and power within prison walls, hinted at Sal's personal resonance with marginalized identities, a subject matter he likely felt compelled to explore given his own life experiences. However, such daring projects were not universally embraced by mainstream audiences at the time, and bills needed to be paid. Thus, we see Sal making appearances on television shows and picking up smaller film roles, a career strategy that underscores the precarious nature of stardom in Hollywood. One moment you're center stage, the next you're scrambling for gigs. Yet, despite these ups and downs, Sal never lost his dedication to the craft. Friends and colleagues from that period often spoke of his professionalism, his willingness to go the extra mile, and the deep passion he brought to every role, no matter how big or small. By the mid-1970s, as he looked for a fresh start in San Francisco, many in the industry hoped he might find a late career renaissance. It's a testament to his talent that, even after his star had dimmed, those who worked with him still lauded his capacity for emotional honesty on stage and screen. Scandal Hollywood during the era of the Hays Code was a place of stringent moral guidelines, not just in what was shown on screen but also in how celebrities were expected to behave off-screen. Public image management was as meticulously curated as any big-budget production. Studios often handled rumors about their stars, especially rumors related to sexuality, by staging press-friendly relationships or marriages, or by offering vague denials when gossip columns started buzzing. An actor discovered to be gay risked condemnation not only by film studios but also by national organizations that threatened boycotts of films deemed immoral. This environment was suffocating for countless LGBTQ personalities. Many lived dual lives, donning a heterosexual facade for the cameras and a closeted reality behind closed doors. Sal Mineo's refusal to mask his truth in elaborate ways was extraordinarily courageous and a direct threat to the status quo. While not all fans turned against him, he had a loyal following who admired his honesty. Some mainstream audiences were less forgiving. In the 50s and 60s, the idea that a male heartthrob could be gay was too scandalous for a broad swath of the American public. Consequently, producers and directors, wary of alienating audiences, might have passed over Sal in favor of safer choices. It's vital to note that Sal's choice to live more openly did not mean marching in pride parades or issuing pointed political statements. The type of activism was rare at a time when public backlash could be severe. Yet even the subtle admission or refusal to deny who he was functioned as a form of activism. It opened the door for more LGBTQ narratives and performers in the industry, some of whom found inspiration in Sal's quiet authenticity. Later generations, from the post-Stonewall 70s onward, would build upon that groundwork, with actors eventually coming out more publicly and safely, even though challenges still remained. Sal's career shift to more experimental and honest stage work, such as Fortune in Men's Eyes, can be interpreted as an extension of his personal convictions. Rather than tamp down the very essence of who he was, he allowed it to inform the roles he chose, often exploring themes of identity, power, and sexuality. These choices hinted at a deeper creative mission, to reflect the realities of human experience, even the ones society preferred to keep hidden. Looking back, we can see how Sal's life and career served as a stepping stone for today's more open entertainment landscape, where an actor's sexual orientation is less likely, though not impossible, to derail a thriving career. Marriage. The 1950s and 60s were rife with carefully planned marriages in Hollywood. It was common practice for studio executives to introduce rising stars to each other and encourage or even mandate a romantic relationship that aligned with the studio's business strategy. This was especially prevalent when rumors of homosexuality emerged around a popular actor or actress. A sudden engagement or marriage could quickly deflect media scrutiny. These arranged unions, sometimes referred to as lavender marriages, served as convenient camouflage in a conservative society. Sal Mineo's choice to stay unmarried and be relatively open about his personal life in private circles placed him under the microscope of celebrity rumor mills. Tabloids speculated endlessly about who he might be dating or why he remained single. Paradoxically, the more he avoided these staged relationships, the more intriguing and suspect he appeared. This further alienated some studios, because they preferred a simple, tidy narrative for their bankable stars, either the dashing leading man with a devoted wife or the flirtatious bachelor who was, at the very least, demonstrably heterosexual. In many ways, Sal's aversion to playing the typical Hollywood game highlighted an independent streak that permeated his entire approach. He refused to morph himself into a sanitized public persona just for the sake of landing more roles. While this authenticity earned him respect among certain artists and fans, it also cost him in an industry that favored pliability. Nevertheless, Sal's steadfast commitment to honesty, despite pressures that might have compelled him to live a lie, paved the way for more open discussions later on. It's a reminder that marriage in the entertainment business at that time wasn't always about love. Often, it was a publicity strategy. By standing outside this pattern, Sal underscored a deeper principle: he wasn't willing to manipulate public perception at the expense of his own self-respect. Other relationships. Perhaps the most talked about relationship in Sal Mineo's life was his bond with James Dean. Their chemistry on-screen in Rebel Without a Cause felt so authentic that viewers speculated about deeper, off-screen intimacy. The truth is that both Dean and Mineo were young men navigating the choppy waters of sudden fame. Dean was dealing with his own complexities, rumored to have had relationships with both men and women. Together, they found an emotional wavelength that lent a haunting, magnetic quality to their scenes. And while the public has always been hungry for details, was it mere friendship or something more? The reality is no one knows for certain. Still, many fans and film historians continue to interpret their on-screen rapport as layered with an undercurrent of genuine longing. Natalie Wood is another figure whose relationship with Sal was pivotal. Both were forging paths out of child stardom into more serious acting realms. The set of Rebel Without a Cause became a crucible for this transition, as all three young leads, Dean, Wood, Mineo, were grappling with personal insecurities and the immense weight of public attention. Their shared experiences bonded them, and Sal often spoke fondly of Natalie's warmth and dedication to her craft. Beyond these high-profile connections, Sal likely had a wide tapestry of friendships that never made headlines. Whether these relationships were romantic, platonic, or somewhere in between, Sal was navigating an industry that prided itself on curated images. If he did have lovers, male or female, who weren't celebrities, it would have been relatively easy to keep such relationships hidden from public view. Paparazzi culture existed but was not as ubiquitous or invasive as it later became. Moreover, the 1950s and 60s system had many gatekeepers, studio publicists, managers, and columnists who could hush stories at a moment's notice. By the time Sal moved deeper into theater work in the 1960s and 1970s, he discovered a creative milieu often more tolerant of personal differences. Stage communities have historically been more accepting of LGBTQ identities, and collaborations there might have allowed Sal to be himself without the constraints that film studios imposed. Theater also offered the chance to produce and direct, giving him more control over the stories he wanted to tell. While details of these professional and personal alliances remain sparse, lost to time and overshadowed by Hollywood's more sensational narrative, there is little doubt that these relationships fueled Sal's passion for challenging, socially relevant drama. Death by 1976, Sal Mineo was ready for a fresh chapter. After some challenging years in film and TV, he seemed energized by his theatrical pursuits, especially P.S. Your Cat is Dead, a comedic drama that showcased his flair for mixing humor with tension. Friends and associates later recounted that Sal was in good spirits, filled with ideas for future projects, and determined to claim a place for himself in a rapidly changing entertainment world. This renewed optimism makes the circumstances of his death all the more heartbreaking. On that fateful February night, after rehearsals, Sal headed home, likely tired but satisfied with the day's work. In the blink of an eye, he became the victim of a random act of violence, stabbed in the heart by Lionel Ray Williams. The notion that the killer didn't even recognize Sal is a chilling reflection of how quickly life can be taken from someone, whether or not they're famous. The entertainment industry, which had grown used to sensational stories, was nevertheless shocked at the sheer brutality and senselessness of the act. Here was a man who'd brought such depth to American cinema, cut down without reason in the prime of a renewed artistic surge. Initial rumors flew. Some speculated that Sal had been targeted because of his sexuality, others pointed to a robbery gone wrong. People questioned whether it was a homophobic hate crime. The investigation concluded that Williams had simply chosen Sal as a victim by chance, though the haze of speculation never fully cleared. Williams's sentence, 57 years, looked significant on paper, yet in practice, he served far less time, eventually receiving parole after just over a decade. This outcome angered fans and moral commentators who believed the justice system had failed. Even setting aside Sal's star status, the crime was violent, and many felt that the punishment did not fit the severity. In an era prior to constant cable news cycles and social media, coverage of Sal's murder was intense but relatively short-lived in comparison to how it might be handled today. Still, major newspapers ran headlines, discussing the vulnerability of celebrities who, due to security or personal preference, lived in areas accessible to the public. Sal's tragedy was also conflated with the misfortunes of his Rebel Without a Cause co-stars, James Dean, who died in a car crash at 24, and Natalie Wood, who would later drown under still controversial circumstances in 1981. Though any talk of a curse is largely tabloid fodder, The sequential tragedies that befell the three lead actors from that seminal film certainly fed the imaginations of fans and journalists. For many, Sal's death felt especially brutal and unfair because it arrived at a moment of second chances. He wasn't a washed-up star retreating into obscurity, he was an artist on the cusp of a renaissance, ready to contribute fresh narratives both on stage and, potentially, again on screen. This abrupt finality underscores how random and cruel fate can be, particularly for those who already paid a heavy price by challenging social norms in an industry that wasn't always ready to embrace them. Legacy Sal Mineo's impact resonates across multiple facets of American culture. In film, he revolutionized the teen archetype, shifting it away from one-dimensional portrayals and showing that adolescence involves raw, layered emotions that mirror the complexities of adulthood if not magnify them. Films like Rebel Without a Cause remain cultural touchstones partly because of Sal's ability to channel adolescent confusion and longing so compellingly. Meanwhile, his role in Exodus demonstrated that the depth of his talent went far beyond teenage angst. He could embody profound historical trauma with empathy and conviction. Beyond the screen, Sal's openness about his sexual orientation marks him as a figure ahead of his time. While he wasn't the first or only LGBTQ individual in Hollywood, his willingness to speak frankly, even if not loudly, challenged an era that penalized such candor. By forging a path for future generations, he became a quiet architect of change. Decades later, we see openly gay actors in leading roles, major film franchises, and TV shows, rights and opportunities that were barely conceivable in Sal's heyday. Each time an actor comes out without demolishing their career, it's worth remembering the pioneers who laid the groundwork when the social cost was far higher. Sal also contributed to shifting norms in storytelling itself. His involvement in plays like Fortune and Men's Eyes ventured into territory that mainstream film studios of the time refused to touch. These works delved into the darker, more complex aspects of human experience, power dynamics, sexual identity, and institutional oppression. By embracing such projects, Sal was effectively helping to expand the conversation. Theater, often more nimble and controversial than film, gave him a platform to tackle themes that would eventually find their way into mainstream discourse. One of the most poignant aspects of Sal's story is the lingering what if. The late 1960s and early 1970s were times of radical change in Hollywood. Directors like Stanley Kubrick, Francis Ford Coppola, and Martin Scorsese were emerging with bold visions that challenged cinematic conventions. The industry was transitioning away from polished studio productions to gritty realism, anti-heroes, and social commentary, exactly the kind of environment where Sal's emotional depth and willingness to explore taboo topics could have flourished. Some fans and historians speculate that he might have evolved into a character actor of astonishing range or even a respected director/producer championing socially conscious narratives. That possibility remains one of Hollywood's enduring unanswered questions. Nevertheless, the star that burned so brightly for a brief period in the 1950s and 60s continues to flicker in public memory. New generations discover Sal Mineo through classic movie revivals, streaming platforms that highlight iconic films, and scholarly work on queer cinema. They see a charismatic, intense performer who wore vulnerability on his sleeve before it was fashionable to do so. They learn about an actor who, despite mounting social pressure, chose authenticity in a notoriously conformist business. His final years, marred by fewer big-screen roles but illuminated by creative theater projects, embody the struggle of an artist forging a new path when conventional options dried up. Ultimately, Sal Mineo's life is both a cautionary tale and a beacon of courage. It illustrates how quickly fame can vanish and how risky it is to stand outside the mold. But it also shows the extraordinary influence a single individual can have by simply being unapologetically themselves. Whether he's remembered as Plato, the grieving Holocaust survivor Dov, or the director daring to stage provocative plays, Sal Mineo remains an emblem of talent intersecting with social defiance. His narrative underscores that every step toward greater authenticity, especially in a realm like Hollywood, has ripple effects that can outlast a single lifetime. And that concludes our look at the captivating yet tumultuous life of Sal Mineo. Even though he was gone too soon, Sal's influence endures, shaping how Hollywood views teen performers, challenging prejudices against the LGBTQ community, and inspiring artists who refuse to compromise their authenticity. Thank you for joining us, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the legacies that continue to shape entertainment history.